but they were trying to spread this rumor that I'm trans and that my husband's gay. The convert who just started getting involved in his faith and is super on fire, and that's great, but that does not mean you are ready for the world of apologetics. I hardly ever see any real correction or anything actually happening. Usually it's just attacking. If you guys can hear my neighbor's kids in the background, I apologize. There's nothing I can do about that. I have been online for a very, very long time, probably since I was around 12 or 13. I mean, we had a family computer and everything like that, but I have been on the online Catholic space for probably the last like 7 years, I want to say, and a lot has changed. Some for the better, some for the worse. But one thing that I feel like we are constantly getting wrong in the online spaces is fraternal correction. And so I really want to talk about that with you guys today, and like what fraternal correction actually is supposed to look like, how people online who say they're using fraternal correction are not using fraternal correction, and how it's actually really hurting the church. And this is all based off of my own experience. I have literally done all of this, and I have grown from it. I have matured from it, and because of that, I want to share that with you guys, because I think there are a lot of issues online that we cause that the church really doesn't need. You know what I'm saying? So grab a little drinkity drink, and before we get started, I first want to tell you guys about our sponsor today, Gloria Patri. So I've been drinking Gloria Patri coffee for a while now, and honestly, this is the best Catholic coffee I've ever had. It's a Catholic-owned company out of Columbia, Tennessee. They do specialty grade coffee. They have light, medium, dark roasts. You can also get it pre-ground if you want, although we do prefer the whole bean. I'm usually a dark roast girly, especially when I'm making my iced coffees, because there's just this complex dark chocolate, cherry, nutty flavor to it. It's really hard to describe, but it's so good. But this company is not just selling coffee, they're raising money for Catholic ministries and religious communities. So if you want to try them, use code HIPPIE20 at gloriapatri.com. It gets you 20% off your first order. It's a great way to support the channel and my growing family, and you guys get coffee out of it. Huge thank you to Gloria Patri for sponsoring today's video. Let's get back into it. So I think the way that we see fraternal correction kind of playing out in the online spaces, I feel like part of it's because people don't actually know what it's supposed to look like. And then on the other spectrum, a lot of people online, including myself, I'm not saying I am perfect by any means. I'm right there with you guys. A lot of people online lack charity, they lack prudence, they lack humility. And you know what? Maybe it's a situation where like all three things are involved. They don't know what fraternal correction looks like and they struggle with virtue. But I've often seen two extremes when it comes to fraternal correction online. And one extreme is basically like a public stoning. You know, there's no charity, there's no actual brotherhood being built or sisterhood being built. It's basically just like dragging somebody publicly through the mud. And then on the other side of it, there's like the limp noodles who refuse to say anything against heresy or refuse to say anything when they actually should speak up, which then of course enables either sinful behavior or it creates this space where heresy gets spread a lot faster. Neither of those extremes are good. And I've talked about extremes before and how there is virtue in the middle. We all know this. But unfortunately, it is really hard to not find yourself on one side of the extreme at times, especially when you spend a lot of time online and the people you listen to and the things that you consume are basically pushing you in one extreme or the other. And look, I have struggled with both sides of the situation. Before I reverted, I struggled with being a limp noodle, and then on the other side, after I reverted, I was way too crazy and rigid and just like my way or the highway, and I've talked about that on my Patreon, which by the way, if you guys want a great way to support the channel and my growing family, that is linked below. And to be completely fair, I do still sometimes struggle with it, mainly because of pregnancy rage. I like to blame the hormones. It's usually a lot easier for me to kind of not pay attention to comments or this or that or the other thing, but after being pregnant, it's a little bit harder with the hormones. So if I'm a little extra sassy in the comments, I apologize. I'm definitely a lot better than I used to be, but still, I'm not perfect. I'm still human. I definitely get sassy every now and then. Anyways, like I was saying, I have been on both sides of the extremes. In both cases where it's like I was dishing out and I was also getting, you know, these types of treatments from people. I don't know if you guys remember a couple years ago when I would post mass fits on X and it just completely spiraled out of control. First of all, X is a cesspool. I hate X. I will never go back on X. I left it because of just how awful it made me feel. It made me feel less charitable towards people. It made me feel more angry about my faith. In general, it just was not healthy. And ever since I actually got rid of X, my anxiety and my cortisol levels have sank significantly. And I will never go back. I don't know how anyone can tolerate being on that app, and also, I don't know, grow in virtue unless like you literally have no connection to the app and you have other people posting for you. Otherwise, it's honestly probably the worst social media app in my opinion. But basically, there was this whole mass fit situation. I wore a dress that was completely appropriate for mass. I don't want to hear it. It was completely appropriate for mass. And I was dragged so hard for it that actually there were articles and newspapers written about me in the Catholic world, basically defending me because of how ridiculous it was that these people were going after me and attacking me. The whole situation, it really was just an opportunity to grow in grace and humility, and I definitely have grown, and I have appreciated those situations to help me grow in virtue, but completely unnecessary, and people constantly blamed it on like fraternal correction, and it's like, that is not what that is. I was never ever contacted privately by any of these big accounts who were dragging me on social media. They never reached out, they never emailed, they never DM'd, they never commented even and been like, hey, can I talk to you in your DMs? Can you open your DMs or something? I usually had my DMs on, but at some points I did have to turn them off for safety. But yeah, I was basically instantly dragged all over social media. The most horrendous things were being said about me. They started trying to dox me. They tried to dox my husband. At the time we were just engaged, but they were trying to spread this rumor that I'm trans and that my husband's gay. There was just so much stuff that was just absolutely insane to me on this app, and there were absolutely no consequences. Well, there are spiritual consequences, of course, but when it comes to actual consequences, like natural consequences, that's the thing about social media. It doesn't really have many. But I digress. The point of me telling you this is just that I have been the one to dish it out before, but I have also been on the receiving end of it, and I know how badly it can really impact somebody's faith, especially if they're not strong in it. When you basically get dogpiled by a bunch of Catholics for a completely normal and non-sinful reason, even then, fraternal correction should be done the way it's meant to be done. But it's absolutely ridiculous how some Catholics can treat other Catholics online. And a lot of the baby Catholics will see that, or converts or reverts will see that. And a lot of times converts end up falling into that issue, or reverts fall into the issue of being too harsh and too rigid towards people. But I know a ton of people who have either left the faith because of this, or they have been deterred from the faith for longer because they see the infighting and they see all the Catholics kind of like dogpile on themselves. And it's really sad to think that somebody waited longer to join the Catholic Church because of people arguing online. As always, a friendly reminder to all Catholics: you represent Christ and his church. Online and offline, you need to act like it. And here's the thing, I will say it's hard for me to strike a balance at times, because really on either side, souls are at stake. On one side, heresy spreads so much faster when nobody stands up and says anything. On the other side of it, we want truth to matter more than people's feelings and their emotions, which I understand, but the problem is the way we actually end up going about it is what either makes it zealous or prideful. You know, when we like dunk on people or we mog people online, or we're like, look at this idiot, look how stupid they are, is completely unacceptable. And there have been worse things that have been said online about other Catholics or non-Catholics, or it's just the ad hominem attacks and all of the attacks in general are absolutely insane. It's completely void of any prudence, any charity, any love. That, my friends, that is rage content. You're not building up the kingdom of God by doing that type of thing. In fact, you're actually hurting it. And it's so easy to see that these people are performing for an audience. They're just doing it because it's what their followers want, because their followers are bloodthirsty, or they themselves are bloodthirsty. Either way, you are performing for an algorithm, for an audience. You're just gonna do whatever gets you the likes, the views, the rage bait, the clicks, everything, instead of what you should be doing, which is loving the person right in front of you. And to be clear, I'm not just saying like, oh, well, just don't be a jerk, like just don't be mean mean online or anything like that. These are actual sins that people are committing, and maybe because it's online, it just doesn't feel like it's a real sin or something, which could be a trick of the devil in the modern age. I don't know. We can talk about that in the comments. But in some ways, this video is me trying to give fraternal correction to other people because of the fact that they might not understand they're hurting their souls when they commit these sins. The sins can, but are not limited to, rash judgment. So that means just like assuming the worst without enough evidence. Detraction, so you're dragging somebody's real faults in front of people who have never even known about them or wouldn't have known about them unless you said something. And then calumny, which I think is probably the most common one I see, and that's just like straight up lying about somebody. But the list goes on and on and on. Those are just like the main three that I have personally seen and that I have personally dealt with. And this is all in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. You can find it in the chapter on offenses against truth. It is just such an important read, so I'm actually going to link that for you guys below so that you guys can read it. It's a super easy read, literally one page. It'll take you maybe 5 minutes, if that. Now, a huge part of fraternal correction online is just detraction, because the actual correction that these people are trying to make for somebody never actually ends up reaching that person in a way where they would actually be able to digest it or accept it. Instead, this fraternal correction is staged for their timeline, it's staged for their audience. I kind of already talked about that, but the point is this correction is not sent to them in private. It's not sent to them in a charitable manner. Honestly, most of the time I just see so many people overcorrecting online. They just love to overcorrect, even if technically what they said wasn't incorrect. They're like, actually. And at the end of the day, it literally just becomes a pissing contest. Like, there is no point to it. It's like you just have to let some things go. So before assuming the worst interpretation or the worst intentions of somebody, try to form a charitable interpretation of them first. Everybody knows in Matthew 7 where Jesus says, remove the log from your own eye before trying to point out the speck in your brother's eye. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing, but even St. Paul in Galatians 6:1 specifically tells us to restore someone gently and watch yourself while you do it, because you could fall into the same thing. I see so many people who will quote like the whole restore gently thing, but then completely skip over the part where it says watch yourself. And if I'm being totally honest with you guys, judging somebody's soul is way above my pay grade. I am not God, nor do I want to be. So yeah, I'm not gonna judge somebody's soul, but we can make judgments based off of somebody's behavior, somebody's actions, especially repetitive actions. For example, like if a robber offered to babysit your kids and you know they were a convicted robber, you're not gonna let them watch your kids. Like, that's making informed judgment on that person. It's not that you hate that person or blah blah blah, but it's just that no, I'm not actually gonna leave you alone with my kids in a house without me because you are a convicted robber. So we can judge somebody based off of their actions, but what we cannot do is we can't play God. We cannot judge their soul. And honestly, we can't judge their intention most of the time either. But then, of course, on the flip side of all of that, staying silent, not saying anything at all, that's not automatically better or more charitable or like a holier approach to a situation. In fact, it could also be just conflict avoidance for some people, because charity demands fraternal correction. It's literally listed in the fruits of charity next to joy and mercy. And this is also in the Catechism. I think it's under the Theological Virtues, but I will link that below for you guys too, because that is also a phenomenal read. Highly, highly suggest. Also very short. You guys aren't going to spend much time reading it, so I highly suggest you do, because you will be more informed for it. Basically, what I'm trying to say though is that you can become complicit by enabling somebody else's sin. So basically, you can sin yourself by not doing something when you should be doing something. Now, when should you speak up? When should you say something? Well, when somebody's committing a mortal sin. If they're Catholic, they're committing a mortal sin. Let's say your friend wants to go to a strip club. All right, your friend wants to go to a strip club and he asks you to drive him and then pick him up. If you drive your friend to a strip club, you are enabling that behavior. That is somewhat on you. And so you will be responsible in some way. It might not be a mortal sin, but it's definitely not good. And I think a really great example of this is from the Bible in Ezekiel 33. But basically in this passage, what I'm trying to get at is, if you see something coming, if you see someone about to commit a sin or something and you don't say anything, that's on you. But if you try to warn the person and they ignore you anyways, that's on them, and you've done everything that you can do. But to be clear, this does not mean you owe a correction to every single stranger on the internet who might get something wrong about Catholicism. Don't let this collapse into, well, I'm obligated to basically comment on everything. That's its own trap in itself, and I'm not going to get into that today, but it's just don't do that, okay? You're not obligated to do that. We're not supposed to do that. We spend too much time online as is. Just log off, do something more productive. And look, the trap is very tempting, I'm not gonna lie, because there's always going to be somebody getting something wrong about Catholicism online. But in my view, today, especially in the modern world, when we have at the tips of our fingers all the information we could possibly want, there really is little to no excuse for people who still believe misconceptions about the Catholic Church. There are genuine people who are just ignorant, and oftentimes these people will email me or they'll DM me and they're like, hey, I'm just curious about this, I don't know about that. They're very sweet, very understanding. But people who blatantly try to tear the church down or try to create division amongst Catholics and things like that, not worth my time. We have great apologists out there like Trent Horn, Joe Heschmeyer, there's a few others of course, where they are actually able to do good by defeating these arguments publicly, because they're usually public arguments. We'll get into that in a second. But not every single Catholic online is an apologist. In fact, most priests have to go through years and years of schooling, and they have to get a master's degree before they can, in theology, before they're actually able to go and be a priest in a parish. But the point being is just that there are people who are trained specifically to do debates, to do these public apologetic, rebukes or whatever it might be. The convert who just started getting involved in his faith and is super on fire, and that's great, but that does not mean you are ready for the world of apologetics. You need to mature in your faith more before you actually end up diving into the online world, apologetics. Like, I'm not saying don't study apologetics, I'm just saying don't teach it authoritatively online, because you are just not formed enough, you are not mature enough in the faith. And I really wish somebody would have told me that, so that I would have been able to mature in the faith more and be formed more before starting, all of my content, because I could have saved myself so many headaches. I also probably could have prevented a lot of, just really sad situations where I prevented people from coming into the church because of my rigidness. I know there were people who said that I helped them so much, and I really love that. But there were definitely a lot of things that I did wrong because I just was not formed, I wasn't mature, and that tends to happen. So I digress. But the point is that Jesus actually gives us a outline of how fraternal correction is supposed to be done. And I think it's in Matthew 18:15 through 17. I'll link it below for you guys and get the right numbers in case that's not correct. But the first thing Jesus says when it comes to fraternal correction is you go to the person privately first. You always start on the base level of, hey, can I talk to you about this? And then if they don't listen, then you go to the next steps. But unfortunately, we tend to jump straight to just like tell it to the church, which ends up becoming tell it to Twitter, tell it to YouTube, tell it to Instagram, instead of actually just reaching out to that person first. If you reach out to them privately first and they don't listen to you, then you go to their friend. If you go to their friend and you're like, hey, blah, 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 and then that friend goes to them, they still don't listen, then you go to their, I think they're a priest technically. And if they still don't listen, you go to the church. But the point is that so many people don't follow these steps. They don't even bother trying to get to know this person. They don't bother trying to DM them personally and be like, hey, I was just wondering what made you think this, or hey, I just want to let you know that this isn't actually correct, in a very charitable and loving manner. If that person blocks you, okay, well, there's nothing you could do, but you did the right thing through private fraternal correction. Jesus specifically tells us that through fraternal correction, we should be trying to gain a brother, not have other people see us being right, not feed our egos by trying to, dunk on everybody who's wrong about Catholicism. We're trying to gain a brother or sister, for that matter, but you guys know what I mean. And this has happened to me in the past where very rarely, but these are great friends of mine now, where I would struggle with something and I would be, online and stuff, and then people would text me and be like, hey, just wondering if you're okay, because it just seems like, you know, what you said here wasn't in like the best form of charity or something. And genuinely, I would be like, oh my gosh, like you're so right. I wasn't in the right headspace. I'm gonna delete it. Or, you know, just having that connection. And the thing is that I didn't really know these people beforehand. So DMing me, emailing me, whatever, they were doing fraternal correction that way, which is how you're supposed to do it. And I was actually receptive to it because they were charitable, they were loving, they were kind, and I was willing to be wrong if needed. But those types of situations are really what helped me to grow and mature in my faith. You know, humility is really important too. It's not like you can just tell somebody in a charitable way and then they're automatically gonna accept it. Some people don't. You also have to be humble and charitable and, you know, prudent when accepting advice or when accepting correction and things like that. But that completely changed the way that I was posting online, because I realized, you know what, yeah, this inflammatory content, this rigid rage bait content is not me. I was going through a really, really rough time with my dad and like a bunch of other situations, and so I was basically taking all of that anger out on people online and also just in general on my timeline, just tweeting really inflammatory things, because you get rewarded when you tweet or whenever you post something really inflammatory, because your engagement shoots up. All engagement's good engagement online. So you slowly start getting into this cycle of like, oh, well, if I just say the most outrageous rage bait type of thing, then I'm gonna get rewarded for it, even if you are basically destroying your soul in the process. So when do you speak up versus letting something go versus not? Honestly, you have to use prudential judgment. I can't give you specifics and be like, in this situation specifically, in that situation, you really need to cultivate the virtue of prudence, and you need to basically practice it where some things just are genuinely not going to be worth your time. For example, I don't engage with people who are obviously trolling or who are extremely inflammatory in my comments. I just don't engage with that because there's no point. But if somebody DMs me something and they're just like, hey, I was just wondering why Catholics do X, Y, and Z or something, I can engage with that. You know, I can do it in the DMs. Sometimes in the comments, I'll be like, oh, well, that's because of X, Y, and Z. You know, we do this because of that. But if they're clearly rage baiting, if they're clearly trying to get you know, some sort of reaction out of you, I usually don't even bother. But St. Thomas Aquinas specifically laid out in the Summa Theologiae basically the questions you should be asking yourself when you're going to conduct fraternal correction. So these are those questions. Ready? Is there reasonable hope that it will help? How grave is the matter? What's your actual relationship to this person? Will speaking up cause more harm than it fixes? And to be clear, public correction is never not inappropriate. Or wait, never not appropriate. Like, you can do it sometimes. I mean, Paul rebukes Peter publicly in Galatians 2 because, well, Peter made a very public mistake. So if somebody with a very big platform is teaching heresy, is teaching things that are anti-Catholic and specifically attacking the Catholic Church, that can constitute a public type of correction. If they're teaching something false publicly to thousands and thousands of people, yeah, okay, a public response, a public rebuke can be warranted for that type of situation. But it still needs to be handled with charity and prudence and love and mercy, because that is completely different than just simply dogpiling on some random anonymous account on Instagram or Facebook or YouTube or whatever who has really clumsy theology or gets things wrong about the faith. Because I'll be honest, a lot of those pile-ons and dog piles that people have on these people is literally just for engagement, and it's just so that they can feel better about themselves. I hardly ever see any real correction or anything actually happening. Usually it's just attacking. And to be clear, I understand that in general, online correction does have an audience by default. Basically what I mean is, like, even a private DM that you have with somebody can be screenshotted and posted on that person's profile, and they can be like, can you believe this person, blah, 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 blah. So the temptation to perform for your followers or for the crowds or for whoever is a little bit more strong than, you know, loving the person right in front of you. But I really genuinely want you to ask yourself, am I doing this for them so that they can grow, so that they can learn, or because I want to be seen being right? I want to be seen doing fraternal correction because I will get engagement, I will get attention, that type of thing. Anyways, but yeah, I guess, you know what, in some ways, I really wish somebody would have told me all of this stuff when I first started in the Catholic space, but at the same time, I don't know if I would have been receptive to it completely. I was very headstrong, very rigid. I thought like, oh, I know what I'm doing. I'm listening to all these other podcasters who are the same way that I am. And so obviously we are right and other people are doing Catholicism wrong. I was extremely immature. I struggled with pride a lot. I just really wanted to feel heard. I really wanted to feel like I was right. But I was definitely a lot more argumentative and harsh and just a bunch of things that I should not have been. But you know, we grow and we learn, and I'm not holding that stuff against myself. It's literally just an experience that I have had that I'm like, I grew from this, and I see so many other people making the same mistake, and it's like, I just don't want you guys to make the same mistakes. I don't want you guys to damage your souls in the same ways that I was doing without realizing it. So at the end of the day, you know what? We're not going to be perfect at this by any means. I think we all struggle in different ways, but being aware of it, being self-aware is literally the first step. And I see so many people who don't even go that far. So at the end of the day, you know what? Whatever side you find yourself on, hopefully you find yourself in the middle. You can take this video with, you know, a grain of salt, but you can also take something good away from it and hopefully be more self-aware with how you act online towards non-Catholics and Catholics alike, but also seeing how the online space can be very toxic, but there's also great opportunities to be able to meet people and to grow in brotherhood or sisterhood with these people online. I have some great friends online. They are amazing. Wouldn't trade them for the world. We all keep each other accountable. We're all very, you know, invested in each other's lives, and I just think that's really beautiful. And we need more community, and we need less of this dogpiling craziness that we see online. Anyways, it's really hot. I'm really tired. Hopefully this video made sense. I don't know if it did or not. I'm kind of just yapping at this point, but I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will talk to you guys in the next video. Bye.